Hey, what's up? I'm Ellie, and welcome back to my channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in May, and I will have timestamps listed down below so that you can check out any titles that you are specifically interested in, since I do tend to read from quite a variety. I also feel like I read a ton of books this month, and then I looked, and apparently I just started a lot of books this month and didn't finish a good many of them. It's fine, it's fine. Welcome to the books that I actually finished in May. Let's get into this. One of the first things that I ended up reading for the month was actually a graphic novel called The Me You Love in the Dark. This was a graphic novel I picked up when I was in Portland when I did my book shopping vlog. Expected. I mostly picked it up because the artwork looked stunning. It's also by Scotty Long, who did I Hate Fairyland, which is one of my favorite graphic novels of all time. This is about an artist who ends up going to this haunted house in order to become inspired to create new content. Her agent, or whatever he is looking for her to create content, and she just isn't producing. So she tries to go to get more inspiration. She goes to the supposedly haunted house, and things take quite the turn. I don't know what I was expecting from this, but it is not what I got, which is great because honestly, I ended up loving this. The darkness kind of like manifests as something, and she takes a lot of inspiration from that and ends up kind of like falling in love with what's happening, and things just take a really dark turn. Fantastic. I really enjoyed this story. I think it's a great discussion into how artists tend to fall into despair pits. I think it's a really great personification of despair and abuse, and also just the ways that we can entrap ourselves into situations. I looked at it as kind of like symbolic. Artists sometimes push themselves to really dark states of mind in order to try to produce different kinds of art and darker art, and then how that kind of how depression can kind of suck you in and whatnot. But you can also take it at face value for exactly what it is. It's a bit of a romanticized horror story. Anyway, the art is fantastic. The story is really gripping, and I really enjoyed it, and I think it's probably going to be one of my favorite graphic novels of the year. I did end up giving this a 4.5. We had more of a longer climax. Don't we all wish that? So next we have Howl's Moving Castle, and you probably have seen, if you've been watching in my vlogs, I did already talk about this in a whole vlog dedicated to this. I was doing like some self-care while I wasn't feeling well by reading this, because I watched Howl's Moving Castle for the first time this year, and I loved it. I became obsessed with it, a little too obsessed with it. So I decided to give the book a try because I didn't realize it was based on a book till after I'd seen it. And basically this is about a young hat maker. She's plain and boring because she has two sisters who are kind of amazing, kind of deal. So they end up going to do their own thing, and she ends up getting cursed by a witch to appear old. So now she's an old lady. She doesn't want to be an old lady. So then she has to go to the apparently evil Howl. Like, she's heard all these terrible things about how Howl will take girls' hearts and like eat them. But she's like, well, I can go to him now because I'm an old lady. He's not going to want my heart. But she's going to need his help. So she goes to good old misunderstood Howl, and ends up getting into more of a pickle than I think she ever signed up for. She ends up basically living with Howl, and there is his young assistant, and there's Calcifer the Fire, and we kind of don't really know. She makes a deal with Calcifer. If she can break Calcifer's agreement with Howl, then he will break the spell on her. So we're trying to figure that out. But yeah, it is much different in my opinion than the movie. I honestly do prefer the movie better. I do think that the characters are much more likable in the movie. Howl is not likable at all in this story, and actually there's a bit of a romance that happens, and it feels more of a shock because there hasn't really been a buildup of that or even a hint towards that at any point in this book. So I just don't think that it did a good job actually making the characters seem likable. And it is a type of writing style that I recognize as, like, I consider old school middle grade fantasy. It kind of reads a bit like C.S. Lewis in a way. Just the sentence structure and the way things are explained are sometimes a little disjointed, but at other times, like, it's just too much description and, like, I don't care. So The story overall at times just felt like I couldn't quite follow exactly what was happening, but also like I didn't really understand why some of the stuff was even put in there. Like it just was too much and it didn't seem like it handled a lot of that really well. So I do think that the movie just did a better job, honestly, at making it more enjoyable and also more likable, but I do think that this stands on its own as its own piece of work, and I still enjoyed it. Itself is really lovable. I love Sophie. I think the magic is much more well explained in this than in the movie, and I do think getting all the different characterizations of like the actual characters, like the background stories, what's going on, was much more enjoyable than in the movie, because in the movie you're kind of just thrown in and you go with it, whereas this you actually have to know a little bit about the characters and what they're doing and why they're doing it. I gave it a 3.5. Again, like, it was fine. Maybe I would have enjoyed this more if I hadn't watched the movie. I don't know. Then I ended up reading Book Lovers by Emily Henry, and I ended up getting this through Libro FM. And for those who don't know, Libro FM is a audiobook service. Basically, you buy audiobooks. It's like a subscription service, kind of like Audible, but you're actually buying from independent bookstores. So I do prefer it, and it was so good. I love this. And I know that there are mixed reviews coming out about this, but I absolutely enjoyed it so very much. It's about a literary agent, and she is working with one of her best clients, and basically goes to this editor to pitch this book, and he's like, no, it's awful. And they make a really bad impression on each other, and they hate each other, and then they part ways. And it's years later, and basically this book has become a hit success kind of deal. And she ends up going to this small town. Her sister is very pregnant. She's like, just wants to get away with her sister. So they go to the small town that this book is based around. It's supposed to be like a cozy small town. And her sister makes this list of like things that they have to do while they're there. And one of them is like fall in love with like one of the small town locals or something, and her sister's like, whatever. She is kind of known as the stereotypical cold businesswoman, and she talks about that. Like, I love that Emily Henry knows the stereotypes in books and takes them and runs with them and then humanizes them instead of making them like over the top and whatnot. She does that. She did that, I believe, in Beach Read as well. I thought she knew what she was targeting about the literary world and made a point to focus on it. So I do love that. I think it brings light to a lot of those stereotypes and whatnot. So I really enjoyed that. And then of course she just so happens to run into the editor who didn't like the book to begin with. And she's like, what the fuck are you doing here? I loved it. I love the banter. I think what I love most about Emily Henry is that her love interests are my type. They're not like the big muscular alpha males and whatnot. They are like nerdy emo boys. That's what I like. Thought it was nice that the story kind of like, they're very aware of themselves but also aware of their feelings, and it's that like third act fight doesn't feel quite the same in this to me. I really enjoyed the small town feel. I enjoyed the banter. I thought it was really fun. I'm interested to see, because I think a lot of the reviews that I've been seeing, the ones that are bad, are talking about the stereotypes, but I actually quite liked the play on the stereotypes, so I ended up giving that a 4.5. It's probably one of my favorite contemporary romances that I've read, not just this year, but probably so far. Just Emily Henry just knocks it out of the park like every time for me. With a change of pace, I've tried a few other contemporaries and just wasn't feeling them. So for a change of pace, I went back to horror, because horror is just what I'm into right now, and I decided to do Night of the Mannequins, which is another book that I picked up in my book shopping blog. So I decided to give this a try. It's Stephen Graham Jones. I'm super into novellas, especially horror novellas right now. So like, you know, some great horror novellas, let me know. I'm really into them right now. So this is not at all what I thought I was signing up for, to be honest. About a group of friends who kind of like sneak around. They're known for like getting kicked out of like the movie theater. This mannequin that they've had since they were children, and they took it around everywhere. And then they're also known for kind of playing pranks on each other. So one day, They take a mannequin to the movie theater thinking that the staff are going to get like freaked out because there's a mannequin and he doesn't have a ticket and they're going to have to kick him out, blah, 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 blah. I'm still not really sure what the prank really was supposed to be. So the problem is that our main character that we follow sees the mannequin get up and leave. And he's like, oh no. Oh no, 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 no. Oh no, 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 no. So he is convinced that this mannequin is now alive. And it just so happens that reports come in that one of his friends is slaughtered that night. So then he's like, oh my God, the mannequin is going around killing our group of friends because we abandoned him and then we pulled him out just for a prank. There's a bunch of other things happening in the story, and I can't tell you anything else without really spoiling anything else. But this did not go in the direction that I thought it was gonna go. So this felt like a bit of a whirlwind, but also I was like highly disturbed reading it. This felt like a very adult version of the Goosebumps slappy books for some reason. It just felt like an adult Goosebumps book because it read a bit juvenile, but the topics of which we are discussing are very dark. This is a 3 to me because although like the things that were happening, I didn't find the story all that compelling. I didn't like our main character. I didn't like being in his head, especially because like nothing was making sense to me and he was connecting dots, but I think, part of that is the point. He was connecting a bunch of dots that like didn't make any sense. And yeah, it just was not at all what I was expecting. It was fine. Honestly, like, it's such a quick read that I didn't mind, but if it would have been a full-blown novel about this, I probably just would have been like, no. So, I'm giving it a 3, which is really upsetting because I really enjoy Stephen Graham Jones's work, and this one just didn't work out. They can't all be winners, I guess. Because I was still on a horror novella kick, I ended up reading Dear Laura. I just found this on a whim. I thought the cover was interesting. I didn't read anything about it. I wanted to go into it totally not knowing anything. And this is a story about Laura, and basically one day she sees her friend being kidnapped. And it has haunted her ever since. And then she starts receiving a letter on her birthday every year. I think it starts when she's like 13. And it is from X, who says that he knows where her friend is at and he will give her clues if she gives him something in return. And the thing is that this person is a pedophile, and so he is asking for gross things from a minor. I'm not going to get into all the things that he gives, or all the things that he asks for and what she gives. And basically, it is about her growing up and realizing that X is manipulating her and that he is a pervert and that she wants no parts of this, so she decides to try to move on with her life, and he follows her. And it is about her kind of struggling with her life and growing older and trying to deal with this, and while also dealing with the trauma of like her friend disappearing and never knowing what happened, and the fact that she couldn't help in the situation. And it was a fairly compelling story, and that like you can't look away. Like you want to know what's going to happen and you're nervous. Like there's this constant dread filling the book, which you're supposed to feel because that's what she feels at all times. And it talks about the ups and downs of this and like the moments when she starts to feel normal and like the way her feelings come back. So it was interesting in that regard, but honestly, like it just felt like it was just trying to be shocking. Like it didn't really feel like a story that was all that new or interesting. I don't think it delivered on any new revelations. It didn't really provide me with a new and interesting story. I kind of had a feeling where it was going the whole time, and I don't know, it just kind of felt surface level. And I know it's a novella, but I would have expected it to get a little bit more, especially when we're talking about the feelings and the trauma that she's gone through, just getting into that a little bit more instead of just like flying through the years. Like we fly through her adulthood, and instead of like just sitting and focusing on the things that are happening. And like the parts that were supposed to be scary and thrilling didn't really feel that way because we're just kind of rushing through it. So I gave this a 2.5. Part part of me is like, oh, it was interesting enough to read, but like honestly, I wouldn't recommend this, especially because the subject matter isn't that nice to read about anyway. So maybe I should stop going into books without knowing anything. Just maybe. And then the last book that I ended up reading for the month was The Gilded Cage. Now, this is a sequel to The Prison Healer. I'm hoping to have some summary videos up about The Prison Healer and The Gilded Cage, because I know the third one has just released in Australia. I think it's coming out in the US this month. So the first one is about a young girl who... her dad is accused of treason, like, against the crown, or conspiracy against the crown. And so they are sent to a death prison. Now he dies and she ends up being in there. She's like 7 years old when she arrives. And she's there for like the next 10 years. So she becomes the healer in this prison system. And she is the one who has to carve out their skin and put a Z for the prison symbol, on all the new prisoners' hands. And one day, 2 prisoners come in. One is a young, handsome man, and she's like, what could this be? Like, he's very fit, he's clean cut, like, how did he get here kind of deal, but she doesn't question it. The only thing is, he keeps coming back and, like, hanging around her and talking around her and whatnot. You know, feelings and all that good stuff. And then the second prisoner that comes in is an old woman. It's a letter, and it is from her siblings. Her siblings talk in, like, code, but this thing basically says that we're coming for you, and we're coming for her, but you have to keep her alive. She's very sick, and they think that she is the rebel leader. They think that she is trying to overthrow the crown, so they sentence her to trials. Now, these trials basically work in that the only people who can survive them are people who have magic, and the only people who have magic are the ruling family. She volunteers herself to go through these trials in order to keep this old woman alive, and then finds out that someone is using magic to save her in these trials. Who could it be? Although it's a bit slower pace of a fantasy, it is still action-packed. And there's a lot happening. We're learning a lot about the prison, there's the trials and whatnot. So it is a really interesting story in the first one. And I loved getting to know the characters. The characters are really likable. We're learning a little bit about the world overall and how the different kingdoms run, and how there is this feud between the royal family and the rebels, because the rebels think they have a claim to the throne, but they're trying to say that, like, no one else exists. So yeah. Flew through it. This one is much slower paced. We are learning a lot more about the political world, and our main character spends most of this book, if not like every other page, worrying about, is she a good person? Is she not a good person? What side is she on? So there's just this constant thought process in her mind, and I'm just like, oh my god, girlfriend, come on, like, get with it. So I will say the series definitely slows down in this one. First half is kind of interesting because you're getting to know more about the world. The middle part drags. It's just like never ending. And then we get to the end and there's all these things that happen like back to back to back to back to back. And the end is like a whirlwind. I like flew through the end part because it felt very much like the first one with all the stuff that was happening. So if you can make it through the middle part, you are rewarded. It's just a lot of effort to get there. And I did still tab it up a good bit of all the things that were happening. So I ended up giving this a 3. I'm not like overly impressed with where this is going and how long it took to get there. I do think the author really loves ending on those cliffhangers. Really loves it. Like, you just don't know what's going to happen next. So I am super intrigued to get to the third one. So it did its job in that. But I just don't think the story was written well enough in the middle. I'm not too sure if it was thought out enough in the middle. The author knew where to begin and where to end the story, and the middle part is just kind of fill. And this book very much felt like too much fill. It just dragged on, and I feel like it could have been shorter, condensed, or possibly even put into just like a duology. I guess we'll see what all happens in the third one and really find out. That was a lot of different things to read this month. I hope that you've liked this video. Don't forget to subscribe to see future wrap-ups from me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!